The FundCalibre research process starts with a quantitative tool called AlphaQuest, which we have built ourselves. The purpose of this tool is to identify consistent, skillful managers. And this research tool does that by looking for alpha generation. And importantly, it also looks at the volatility of that alpha. And the thinking being that managers who can consistently deliver alpha with a low volatility of that alpha are skillful, and therefore we believe this is predictive of future performance. And all our research begins with this quantitative tool, including when we come to review funds at each quarter. Those funds which have deteriorated on the AlphaQuest quant tool will, of course, then be particularly analysed as to why that has been the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think James articulated that really nicely. AlphaQuest is the starting point for funds gaining a rating and or potentially losing a rating. If the we do see fund managers either face-to-face or on virtual calls, and it's where a manager performs out of line with their expectations. So if a manager has a certain style bias and either under or outperforms when that is either in or out of their favour, that's the sort of thing that gives rise to question. But the AlphaQuest score is at the heart of the elite rating. And if an AlphaQuest score has deteriorated and we can't understand why, then that might lead to a fund losing its rating.
Yes, and the quantitative aspect is always just the first part of the process. To be elite rated in the first place, you must pass the AlphaQuest quant, and then we do a full qualitative assessment as well. And it's a similar process when a fund loses its elite rating. If the quant has deteriorated, we will want to understand why, and then sometimes we will follow up with further qualitative work, which might include a meeting with the manager as well. As Darius says, there can be reasons for why a score might have deteriorated because of a particular style bias or so on. We try and limit this. We will, of course, run funds against an appropriate benchmark, which hopefully will include a style bias as well as any market cap bias. We also have built up a composite system whereby we can tweak and create our own sort of composites to run the funds against. But there are really two reasons as to why the AlphaQuest score will deteriorate. Most obviously, of course, the alpha deteriorates. But of course, the other thing which is perhaps less forgotten about, but is very important in the AlphaQuest process, is that volatility of alpha. And if a fund increases massively in terms of its volatility or the volatility of its alpha, that may be down to luck rather than a consistent skill. And that is the other part of the AlphaQuest process.
Well, we make it particularly difficult to get an elite rating. As James says, firstly, it must pass AlphaQuest, our minimum requirement. And in most instances for new funds, we want it to substantially pass AlphaQuest. We want a high output score. So if a fund loses its rating, it could be one of the factors will clearly be a deteriorating AlphaQuest score, but also sometimes funds don't do as well when we think they should do. And, whilst we make it very difficult to gain an elite rating, we have to be as diligent on the other side. And when we think things are changing, that can be for a multiple of factors, but it might be that a fund or a strategy is in redemption, which is making it much more difficult for a manager to show alpha. Sometimes funds get too big. And in our judgment, that they may not be able to produce that ongoing alpha. So there are lots of different things in consideration. It doesn't mean a hard sell signal, but it certainly should be triggering advisors' thoughts if they hold funds that have lost ratings.
Yes, and it may also just be more simple than that. For example, if the manager leaves or retires, which always means in our case that the rating is lost. because we require a minimum of a 3-year track record to get the elite rating. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's become a bad fund overnight. So, but it does mean, I think, as Darius says, that you probably want to have a review of the fund.
Well, I think there's, again, no right or wrong answer to this question. Some advisors are more investment driven. That's some of their background and interest. And others are less interested in investments and maybe outsource their investment solution to multi-asset funds or model portfolios. So we have quarterly investment committee, 2 big committees, one in winter, one in summer, and then one in sort of March and one in sort of October. So we do it quarterly. I would think that's probably more than most IFAs need to do, but I think annually would be a minimum suggestion.